Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tells a joint meeting of Congress that the world stands at a crossroads of history and America and Israel must stand together. As he lays out what victory over the Hamas militant group looks like, he says demilitarization and deradicalization. Some members of Congress boycott his speech in protest of a war that has killed tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza. While in the streets of Washington, D.C., thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters march, and some clash with police, which deploy pepper spray. We'll get the latest from Washington Post national security reporter Abigail Hauslohner. President Joe Biden speaks tonight from the White House Oval Office about why he ended his run for re-election. Democratic National Committee Rules and Bylaws Committee meets to finalize the process and timing for a virtual roll call of Democratic National Convention delegates to nominate a candidate for president. At this point, it's likely to be Vice President Kamala Harris. All this before the in-person convention in late August in an effort to head off challenges to some states' ballot access laws for the November election. FBI Director Christopher Wray testifies before the House Judiciary Committee on the investigation of the attempted assassination of former President Trump. And the Summer Olympics about to begin in Paris. Today, the International Olympic Committee awarded the 2034 Winter Games to Salt Lake City, Utah. From Associated Press, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended Israel's ongoing war in Gaza and condemned American protesters in a scathing speech to Congress Wednesday that triggered boycotts by many top Democratic lawmakers and drew thousands of protesters to the Capitol to condemn the war in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis it has created. 9 months into the war in Gaza, Netanyahu vowed to press on with the war until total victory. He also sought to bolster U.S. support for his country's fight against Hamas and other Iran-backed armed groups and bitterly condemned widespread opposition in the United States to the war. That was the article from Associated Press. Here's some of the Prime Minister's speech.
I deeply appreciate America's support, including in this current war. But this is an exceptional moment. Fast-tracking U.S. military aid can dramatically expedite an end to the war in Gaza and help prevent a broader war in the Middle East. In World War II, as Britain fought on the front lines of civilization, Winston Churchill appealed to Americans with these famous words: "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job." Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster and we'll finish the job faster. My dear friends, the war in Gaza could end tomorrow if Hamas surrenders, disarms, and returns all the hostages. But if they don't, Israel will fight until we destroy Hamas's military capabilities, end its rule in Gaza, and bring all our hostages home. That's what total victory means, and we will settle for nothing less. The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Israel does not seek to resettle Gaza, but for the foreseeable future, we must retain overriding security control there to prevent the resurgence of terror, to ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. Gaza should have a civilian administration run by Palestinians who do not seek to destroy Israel. That's not too much to ask. It's a fundamental thing that we have a right to demand and to receive. A new generation of Palestinians must no longer be taught to hate Jews, but rather to live in peace with us. Those twin words, demilitarization and deradicalization, those two concepts were applied to Germany and Japan after World War II, and that led to decades of peace, prosperity, and security. Following our victory, with the help of regional partners, the demilitarization and deradicalization of Gaza can also lead to a future of security, prosperity, and peace. That's my vision for Gaza.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before a joint meeting of Congress in Washington. It's his fourth speech to a joint meeting of Congress over his career, most by anyone in U.S. history. More from the Associated Press article, freed former hostages of Hamas and families of hostages listened in the House chamber as Netanyahu spoke. Lawmakers of both parties rose repeatedly to applaud the Israeli leader, while security escorted out protesters in the gallery who rose to display T-shirts with slogans demanding the leaders close a deal for a ceasefire and the release of all hostages. A weeping Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, a Michigan Democrat, held a sign in the House chamber that says, "War criminal." That's from AP. C-SPAN spoke this morning with Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat from California, who said she was not going to attend the Prime Minister's speech.
I will not be attending. He should never have been invited in the first place. And Netanyahu has undermined the prospects for peace in the Middle East consistently. And this is a time when we need peace in the Middle East. We need to bring those hostages home. We need to stop the killing of civilians. Now 38,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and they are also being deprived of basic food and medicine. They are suffering. We've got to bring an end to this. We need to have a ceasefire right now. We also need to have a path towards peace in the Middle East, which I believe has to be a two-state solution. Otherwise, Israel will always be under threat of an attack. It is unless Palestinians have a place to go for themselves that we will finally get to have peace in the Middle East. But Netanyahu is not providing any solution towards permanent peace. He should never have been brought here because he is simply a divisive figure who in fact wants to continue this war for his own political survival since he is facing criminal indictments in Israel.
Congresswoman Judy Chu, Democrat from California, on C-SPAN's morning program Washington Journal. CNN wrote an article ahead of the Prime Minister's speech today. A number of Democratic lawmakers are planning to participate in a series of counter-programming events instead of attending, the latest example of how Democrats remain divided over Israel's handling of its war with Hamas. One event titled Peace is Possible, an Alternative Vision for Israel and Palestine will feature Israeli and Palestinian peace leaders and is hosted by groups like the Center for American Progress and Middle Eastern Democracy Center, with opening remarks from Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal, a Washington state Democrat. Separately, senior House Democrats, including Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, and Jamie Raskin of Maryland, met with the families of Israeli hostages who were kidnapped during the October 7th Hamas terror attack. House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, also did not attend the speech, and she was at that event with the families of the hostages. A dozen Senate Republicans held a news conference right before the Prime Minister's speech in support of Israel and its prosecution of the war against Hamas. Senator Joni Ernst is from Iowa.
Right now, folks, as we're standing here safe in the Capitol building, Israel is fighting for their right to exist. And our fellow Americans' lives are quite literally on the line. On October 7th, 32 Americans were killed and dozens were taken hostage. And we know 8 of those that were taken hostage are still being held by Hamas. We believe that 5 of them are alive. The Biden-Harris administration has not only turned their back on our American hostages, you don't ever hear them mention our American hostages, but they've also turned their back on our close friend and ally, Israel. When Israel needed support and our citizens needed saving, President Biden withheld weapons, and Vice President Harris fueled pro-Hamas rhetoric. That's our vice president. Neither the vice president nor the president were there to welcome the Prime Minister of Israel on his arrival. So, folks, Israel was attacked by Iran-backed terrorists, and sadly, they have been attacked by the United States administration. Never, never should this have happened. Senate Republicans stand in solidarity with Israel. We stand in solidarity with the Prime Minister as they defend their country and work to defeat Iran-backed Hamas. So we are demanding action from this waffling White House. Number one, end the appeasement. Two, enforce the sanctions and supply the weapons Israel needs to defeat Hamas, and ensure that terrorists are never, ever, ever emboldened to take American hostages ever again.
Senator Joni Ernst, Republican from Iowa, at a news conference on Capitol Hill with other Senate Republicans right before Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to a joint meeting of Congress. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden plan to meet with the Israeli Prime Minister on Thursday, and former President Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee this year, says that the Prime Minister will go down to his home, Mar-a-Lago, Palm Beach, Florida, to meet him on Friday. Today, on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building and surrounding streets, there were pro-Palestinian protests. One was organized by the group Answer Coalition. That acronym ANSWER is Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. Zaina Ashwari Hutchison is with the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee.
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
We are meters away from a war criminal being celebrated. They're not only celebrating a war criminal, they are protecting a war criminal. The irony is that Cop City built these metal cages to keep us, the people, out to protect the guilty. But what they don't realize is that we are the ones here, free, with the truth and calling for justice, and they are the cowards, captive, literally and figuratively. They are the ones who will forever be imprisoned in the legacy of genocide. We see you. We see you. Liberation is inevitable and accountability is coming. We protest a genocidal maniac, his supporters and enablers, and demand his arrest. But we will not give them the attention they so crave. Because despite them, we are here to uplift and center the Palestinian people in Gaza, in Tulkarem, in Al Khalil, in Jenin, in Nablus, in Ramallah, in Jaffa, in Haifa, in Bisan, in Bethlehem, in Rashrash, in Jericho, in Al-Quds, in all Palestinians and Palestinians in refugee camps and in exile.
Zaina Ashwari Hutchison with the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, speaking on the stage at a protest organized by the Answer Coalition right outside the U.S. Capitol building. Throughout the day, there were also some violent clashes at Union Station. Some protesters took down a U.S. flag from a flagpole, replacing it with a Palestinian flag, and burned the U.S. flag on the ground, also burned an effigy of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And on the street, a group of protesters were marching, trying to make their way closer to the U.S. Capitol building, met by a police line. A post on the U.S. Capitol Police account on X reads, "Part of the crowd has started to become violent at 1st Street and Constitution Avenue Northwest. The crowd failed to obey our order to move back from our police line. We are deploying pepper spray towards anyone trying to break the law and cross that line." The Answer Coalition account on X wrote, "Capitol Police brutally pepper spray and tear gas protesters marching against war criminal Netanyahu, but the march continues. The people stand with Palestine." The news organization Post Millennial put up some video of the protesters as they were being pepper sprayed.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
To talk more about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to a joint meeting of Congress, we're joined by Abigail Hausloner, Washington Post national security reporter. Thanks for being with us. In the opening of your article at WashingtonPost.com, you describe the Prime Minister as defiant in today's speech, but also embattled in his hold on power. What did you hear today?
The Prime Minister, who spoke for almost an hour just now to a joint session of Congress, was defiant in that he dismissed his critics. This is a leader who is currently facing charges of war crimes by the International Criminal Court. He has been criticized by, all of the world's leading human rights organizations, by the UN, by world leaders, for civilian casualties in Gaza, basically for the way that he and his government have prosecuted this ongoing war in Gaza that has killed about 39,000 Palestinians at this point, and for Israel's role in a blockade that has kept humanitarian assistance from reaching a lot of people. But what we heard from Netanyahu today was, a dismissal of those claims and an effort to really brand those critics as, the sort of propagators of nonsense, of people who are, quote, the useful idiots of Iran, serving Iran's agenda. And he characterized this fight that Israel is in as one that is really inextricably linked to the United States and its own security.
Before his speech, there were reports that some members of the House and Senate would be boycotting. How many did stay away?
Well, we counted a little over 50 who pledged to skip the speech. Many provided statements ahead of time explaining why they were protesting, why they were sitting it out. But we also saw some in the chamber, notably Representative Rashida Tlaib, who is the only Palestinian American member of Congress and has been a really outspoken critic of Netanyahu's government and of the Biden administration's support for his government. She was there. She was wearing a kufiya, that's the Palestinian scarf, and she stayed seated throughout the speech, but she did not interrupt it. She was seen occasionally holding up a little placard that said "war criminal" on it. But it was interesting. There were a lot of folks missing, obviously, and even those who did attend, it was noteworthy. Certainly by the end, or midway through the speech, even a lot of Democrats had stopped standing up to applaud as Netanyahu made his points, while Republicans were continuing to stand and applaud and cheer.
We're talking with Abigail Hausloner from the Washington Post. There were also large protests surrounding the Capitol building and some clashes with police.
That's right. And Capitol Police said that they arrested actually 5 individuals from inside the chamber for protesting during the address. And the police, as of yesterday morning, had erected these massive barriers. One officer told me that it sort of surpasses what they had up in terms of security in the aftermath of the January 6th riot and attack on the Capitol. So, police are taking this sort of threat of protests and, anger towards Netanyahu very seriously today, and we're really out in force.
And going back to the tone of the speech and the invitation, primarily from House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican, what was the purpose of giving this speech, and was that purpose accomplished?
Well, Netanyahu, he really stuck to a bipartisan line, which I spoke to Senator Ben Cardin, who presided afterwards, and Cardin said that was welcome, that they were Democrats were very concerned that about a partisan tone ahead of the speech, which Netanyahu has taken in the past. But Republicans have really sought to kind of capitalize on this moment of disarray in the Democratic Party, where you have some Democrats who are very much in support of Israel and Netanyahu's government, and others who have become very critical of his government's handling of the war in Gaza, which obviously was evidenced through those who boycotted and those who chose to attend. And so I think Republicans were hoping to really use this as an illustration of how their party, in their words, has become really Israel's one true ally and Israel's reliable ally in the United States, while Democrats have sort of betrayed their major ally, or at least that's the point that Republicans are hoping to make. However, Netanyahu really framed his speech as, sort of was seeking to make it a unifying message. He didn't talk about Democrats or Republicans. He even praised Biden at one point as a Zionist. And he implored Congress to send Israel, more weapons and faster so that it could finish the job. And he argued that Israel is sort of doing this service for the U.S., for the world, by fighting terrorists and fighting barbarism in the Middle East, and that, because of Israel's fight, it's, saving Americans from having to have boots on the ground.
Abigail Housloner, Washington Post national security reporter. You can find her articles at WashingtonPost.com and on X at @AHousloner. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
President Joe Biden, writes ABC News in a rare Oval Office address to the nation, will speak extensively for the first time on his decision to withdraw from the 2024 race and his plans for what will now be the final few months of his long political career. Biden will address remarks at 8 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, 3 days after his bombshell announcement in a letter addressed to my fellow Americans that he was stepping away from the campaign trail. He will also discuss how he will finish the job, the phrase that became his re-election motto as he campaigned for a second term against his 2020 rival, Donald Trump. That was from ABC News. The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was asked about this today at her news conference.
You read the president's statement where he said that it's in the country's best interest for him to step aside. Why is it in the country's best interest for him to step aside? Does it have to do with his health, or
it does not have to do? They have nothing to do with his health. Again, the president's going to speak to this directly to the American people tonight in prime time. I know many of you all will be watching it. There are specials going on tonight. He will, I promise you, he will speak to this directly to all of you tonight. But in his letter, he talked about the country, he talked about the party, he talked about the moment that we're in right now. It is not about his health. I can say no, that's not the reason, but hear him out tonight.
And the president denied for weeks, and you denied for weeks, that he was even thinking of stepping aside. What changed from all those days that he had that message to Sunday?
So look, he's going to address this as well this evening. Let him speak for himself. But here's what I will say. And I think we gave a little bit of a TikTok to all of you. He met with a small group of advisors on Saturday evening, and with his family, and was thinking through how to move forward. Sunday afternoon, he made that decision. It was in a very short period of time, as you can imagine. And then at 1:45, he got on the phone with some of his assistants to the president, some advisors. He let them know, and then minutes later, a letter went out. So it was in a very short period of time that the president was able to think about this and make a decision. But I would say again, the president's going to address the American people. You will hear directly from him tonight.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her news conference. C-SPAN Radio and Television will carry the president's Oval Office speech tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. Republican presidential nominee, former President Donald Trump, will be holding a campaign rally in Charlotte, North Carolina, scheduled for 6 p.m. Eastern tonight. Hear that live on C-SPAN Radio and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke today at historically black sorority Zeta Phi Beta's Boule, the annual national gathering in Indianapolis. Story from the New York Post. The Democratic National Committee Rules Committee voted Wednesday to hold a virtual roll call to nominate their party nominee instead of waiting to vote for President Biden's replacement in person at the DNC convention. The virtual roll call is expected to happen in the first week of August. Vice President Kamala Harris, who was endorsed by Biden to replace him for the nomination, is the only candidate who is currently up for election. There was some pushback in the deliberations on taking up a virtual vote. One delegate expressed she didn't want to see the virtual platform become a permanent expectation because it takes away from transparency. That was from the New York Post. Here's Leah Daughtry, the co-chair of the Rules Committee, at today's virtual meeting.
Today's Rules Committee meeting is the initial step. We are here today to adopt proposed rules. While this committee, through the rules, defines the steps of the process, the DNC chair and the permanent chair of the convention, not our committee, will determine the precise timeline. Additionally, please note that the DNC's call to convention controls unless there is an issue addressed in the rules. That said, we have been in communication with both chairs of the DNC and the DNCC and understand the following to be the timeline against which they are working. After the rules are adopted and made available to the public, candidates for the office of president will have a window to declare their intent to pursue the nomination. This window will be from Thursday, July 25th to Saturday, July 27th at 6:00 p.m. Eastern Time. After filing their declaration, candidates will need to qualify to be considered for the nomination at a virtual roll call in August. The window will start after the candidate declares their intent to pursue the nomination, and it will end on Thursday, July 30th. To qualify, candidates need a baseline of support of delegates. So this means that between declaring this week and the roll call in August, the goal of any candidate is getting at least 300 delegates to sign a petition of support with no more than 50 from any one state counting for the purposes of this threshold. It is critical that nominees be able to demonstrate that they have a broad base of support from different parts of the country. The 300 threshold has been in place since at least 1996, and it represents a serious but modest level of support equal to about 6% of the convention's delegates. Our process must be flexible, and our timeline accounts for multiple scenarios. If more than one candidate qualifies for nomination, the respective chairs of the DNC and the convention have the discretion to allow a several-day period, which may not be longer than 5 days, during which qualifying candidates can make their case to the delegates and the public. In determining the length of this period, the chairs will consider the relative support reflected on the electronic nominating petitions. We expect that in this scenario, where there is more than one candidate, voting would likely begin on or around August 3rd. If only one candidate qualifies, we expect voting to begin on August 1st. This process will be completed by early August so that the nominee may vet and pick a vice presidential candidate to allow the ticket to meet state valid access deadlines, and to ensure that convention programming can be updated to provide the best platform for the new ticket.
Leah Daughtry, Democratic National Convention Rules and Bylaws Committee co-chair at today's virtual meeting. Ohio's ballot access deadline to have the presidential and vice presidential nominees named is August 7th, and the in-person Democratic National Convention in Chicago begins August 19th. And the DNC putting out a press release today. The Convention Rules Committee, in partnership with the DNC and DNCC, voted to adopt the permanent rules of the 2024 Democratic National Convention by a vote of 157 to 3. And those rules include this virtual nomination process. Story from The Hill. Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican of Tennessee, said Wednesday he regrets calling Vice President Harris a diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI hire, even as he doubled down on the comments. The comments drew swift backlash from legislators across both sides of the aisle. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican of California, called the attack stupid, while Congressional Black Caucus Chair Steve Horsford, Democrat of Nevada, said in a press release Tuesday that the DEI comments about Harris are disgusting and offensive. That was the reporting from The Hill. Congressman Burchett today was on the Sirius XM show, The Laura Coates Show.
What's been the reaction, I'm curious, Congressman Burchett, that you have received for your comment? I mean, you were all over the headlines I saw, frankly, across networks.
Ma'am.
What has been the reaction to your comment referring to her in the way that you did?
Folks from out of the district overwhelmingly don't like it. I mean, the trouble the conservatives have is they don't express themselves as well on the internet. But within my district, it's been overwhelmingly in favor of it. And then when folks are explained that this was, in fact, a statement that the president had made, and that was one of his criteria for putting her on the ballot with him, then folks understand it. But, I get the activists, and they come off, if they're going to say something filthy to the young staff members, and it's easy to hide behind a keyboard or a telephone, but they're not saying it in person. And actually, members of Congress, both parties, have said, look, yeah, we get it, but this is what we got to do because this is what our base and our leadership's demanding. So, yeah. Do I wish I'd said it? No, but it was the truth. And what had happened was I'd walked out of the meeting. It was a hot meeting over the Secret Service director. And I actually, I was asked about her, and I continued to say that she was a terrible hire, which she was, and she ended up resigning in shame. And then, the CNN reporter stuck in the part about the vice president, and that's where it all came out. So, it's one of those things. You live and learn. I do. And one day at the convention, I gave 20 interviews, so it's not all going to be gravy.
Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican from Tennessee, on the Laura Coates Show on Sirius XM. Politico reports that a pair of House Democrats are considering introducing a censure resolution for Congressman Burchett in response to his comments calling Vice President Kamala Harris a DEI hire. According to two people familiar with discussions, the two members are Congressman Tony Cardenas, Democrat of California, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Democrat of Texas. Washington Today continues in a moment.
As more people cancel cable TV, C-SPAN's funding is at risk. This summer, an anonymous donor has stepped up to help by matching all donations up to $25,000. I'm Caitlin with C-SPAN, and this means your gift will go twice as far. Your donation supports unfiltered access to government and public affairs programming, including the C-SPAN podcasts you value. Visit cspan.org/donate to make your gift today. Every dollar helps us reach our $25,000 goal. Thank you for listening and supporting C-SPAN. Donate today at cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. FBI Director Christopher Wray testified before the House Judiciary Committee today about the investigation into the recent attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump at a campaign event in Butler, Pennsylvania. Director Wray said that the alleged gunman, Matthew Crooks, was not in any FBI database before the shooting, and that he fired at least 8 shots. That's how many shell casings were found on the roof. He flew a drone about 200 yards from the stage where Donald Trump spoke about 2 hours before the rally. The drone was found in his car, along with a drone controller and 2 explosive devices that could be remotely detonated. Another explosive device was found at his residence, and they had a transmitter on him, but it appears remote detonation, in the FBI's words, would not have worked, and that the shooter may have had a firearm with a collapsible stock, making it easier for him to conceal the weapon, explaining why no one saw him carrying it around. And the shooter had researched President John F. Kennedy's 1963 assassination, specifically Googling how far away the shooter in that case, Lee Harvey Oswald, was from Kennedy. Here's part of today's hearing, the FBI director talking about that drone.
We have recovered a drone that the shooter appears to have used. It's being exploited and analyzed by the FBI lab. The drone was recovered in his vehicle. So at the time of the shooting, the drone was in his vehicle with the controller. In addition, our investigation has uncovered...
Do you know what time of day he flew it, and if he flew it on the day of the shot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So in addition, it appears that around 3:50 p.m., 4 o'clock in that window, on the day of the shooting, that the shooter was flying the drone around the area
2 hours.
For about 11 minutes. I want to be clear, but when I say the area, not over the stage and that part of the area itself, but I would say about 200 yards, give or take, away from that. We think, but we do not know. So again, this is one of these things that's qualified because of our ongoing review, that he was live streaming, viewing the footage from that, again, about 11 minutes in around the 3:50, 4 o'clock p.m. range.
2 hours before, he's flying a drone in the vicinity of the rally.
About 200 yards away, yes.
FBI Director Christopher Wray at the House Judiciary Committee hearing today. You also heard from the chair, Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio. Another part of the hearing, the director revealed what had been found on the phone of the suspect, Matthew Crooks.
What we've been able to find so far, a lot of the usual repositories of information have not yielded anything notable in terms of motive or like ideology. Having said that, it does appear fairly clear that he was interested in public figures, kind of more broadly, and I think this is important, that starting somewhere around July 6th or so, he became very focused on former President Trump and this rally. And so one of the things that I can share here today that has not been shared yet is that we've just in the last couple of days found that from our review, to your point about devices, analysis of a laptop that the investigation ties to the shooter reveals that on July 6th, he did a Google search for, quote, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy? And so that's a search that obviously is significant in terms of his state of mind. That is the same day that it appears that he registered for the Butler rally.
FBI Director Christopher Wray at today's House Judiciary Committee hearing on the investigation into the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The director said the FBI is looking into this shooting as a potential act of domestic terrorism, but does not yet have a clear picture of the gunman's motive. From Associated Press, Delta Airlines expects flight cancellations and delays that resulted from a global technology breakdown last week to be resolved by Thursday, the carrier's chief executive said. In a message to customers, Delta CEO Ed Bastian apologized Wednesday to travelers who had their plans upended after a defective software update that cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike sent to computers using Microsoft Windows grounded flights and disrupted banks, hospitals, and retailers Friday. Bastian said, while our initial efforts to stabilize the operations were difficult and frustratingly slow and complex, we have made good progress this week, and the worst impacts of the CrowdStrike-caused outage are clearly behind us. U.S. Department of Transportation is investigating why Delta failed to recover as quickly as other airlines. That was an AP story. And the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, posting on X today, on hold for hours, sleeping on airport floors, unaccompanied minors stranded. These are the stories we are hearing from Delta passengers. We are committed to ensuring airlines take care of their customers. Our investigation into Delta will support and uphold these standards. The secretary announced the investigation last night in D.C.
I wanted to take a moment just to express our concern about what is going on with Delta passengers and to make clear what we're doing about it. We informed Delta today that DOT is launching an investigation into the breakdown of operations and into the customer service situation. I'm hearing a lot of things I'm very concerned about, including people being on hold for hours and hours trying to get a new flight, people having to sleep on airport floors, even accounts of unaccompanied minors being stranded in airports, unable to get on a flight, and have taken several steps to remind Delta of their responsibilities here. I directly communicated to Delta's CEO our expectation that Delta will live up to their passenger service commitments, including specific commitments that we secured from Delta in 2022 and are prepared to enforce. That's things like rebooking passengers at no additional cost on Delta or on other airlines in order to get them to where they're going. And when there is a lengthy delay, to come through and provide hotels, accommodations, meals, ground transportation, and similar costs. Part of why we are opening this investigation is the scale of the problem. Over 6,000 flights have been canceled since Friday. Hundreds of flights have been canceled today, and we estimate that more than 500,000 passengers have been impacted by this. So we're not taking this step lightly, but clearly there is something unique to Delta that requires specific attention. Our immediate focus, again, is to make sure that they take care of their passengers. But also we want to understand how this could have happened and what will be done to make sure that it can't happen again.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg making that announcement in Washington Tuesday night. Wall Street today, the Dow down 504, NASDAQ down 654, S&P down 128. Story from ESPN, Salt Lake City was formally awarded the 2034 Winter Olympics following a Wednesday vote by the International Olympic Committee in Paris, which gives Utah its second games after hosting in 2002. Salt Lake City was the lone contender the Olympic Committee was considering for 2034. Climate change and high operational costs have reduced the number of cities willing and able to welcome the Winter Games. That was from ESPN. The IOC President Thomas Bach made the announcement at that meeting in Paris where this year's Summer Games are about to begin.
The International Olympic Committee has the honor to announce that the 27th Olympic Winter Games 2034 are awarded to Salt Lake City, Utah.
And after that announcement, U.S. Senator Mitt Romney, Republican from Utah, who was president and CEO of the Salt Lake City Organizing Committee for the 2002 Winter Olympics in that city, put out a video.
It is official. The Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games are coming back to Salt Lake City in 2034. Now, when I was involved in the 2002 Games, I was inspired by the Olympians who demonstrated the greatest qualities of the human spirit through their grit and athleticism, their determination, and their courage. But I was also inspired to see so many Utahns come together in official as well as voluntary roles to serve those who were visiting from nations across the globe. During those games, Utah demonstrated to the entire world its unique spirit of service and fellowship. And Utah is well prepared to host the world once again for the Winter Games. We are a leading hub for winter sports. Our economy is resilient and growing. Our sporting venues and infrastructure are well kept and regularly used for competition. And of course, we have the greatest snow on Earth. I want to congratulate and thank all those who put in tireless work to make this happen, especially Fraser Bullock, who led the effort, as well as state leaders. I look forward to cheering on Team USA as they compete in the Beehive State in 2034.
Senator Mitt Romney, Republican from Utah, in a video. NBC News article reads that Salt Lake City had appeared to be a 2034 shoo-in for weeks, but late concerns came from the IOC about U.S. authorities possibly not supporting the embattled World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA. U.S. lawmakers had launched an investigation into alleged doping by Chinese swimmers ahead of the Tokyo Games, perhaps undermining WADA's authority. Also announced today, the French Alps will be getting the 2030 Winter Olympics. An article at The Forward, formerly known as the Jewish Daily Forward, amid a highly contentious political season and as the U.S. witnesses history unfold in the presidential race, a number of high-profile Democrats and Republicans gathered on Wednesday morning at a synagogue to remember a man who both made history and valued bipartisanship. 4 months after the death of Joe Lieberman, the longtime Connecticut senator and Vice President Al Gore's running mate in the 2000 presidential election, more than 200 dignitaries, senior government officials, and members of Congress gathered at the Washington Hebrew congregation in D.C. to pay tribute to his memory. Sitting alongside one another were former Vice President Mike Pence, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, and senators from both sides of the aisle. That was from an article in The Forward. Here's part of the tribute from Al Gore.
During that campaign of 2000, we became kin, really. Our families became kin too, Hadassah. We laughed together, and we fought like hell together, and we prayed together. We thought for a season we had won together. And I learned a lot from Joe, including a few words of Yiddish, and I was already familiar with the word mensch, but I did not know its full meaning until I got to be a good friend of Joe Lieberman. And if you want to know its full and true meaning, you can skip the dictionary and just look at the way Joe Lieberman lived his life. He put friendship over anger. He practiced reconciliation as a form of grace. I believe we can all learn from Joe's life some critical lessons about how we might heal the rancor in our nation today. I speak from personal experience because after that 2000 race, Joe and I developed some very deep disagreements on policy and political matters, and no matter how hard I tried or how hard Joe tried, we could not convince the other of the merit of our respective positions. And those of you who've had arguments with Joe know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not an accident that he would often break out into song, usually his favorite song, Frank Sinatra's My Way. How many people have heard him sing My Way? I know, yes, all right, that was a frequent occurrence on the campaign trail. And I've thought about those days a lot because in spite of our disagreements in those days, we both knew deep down that the strong foundation of our friendship and the values that we shared in common were so much stronger than what was driving us apart in those years.
Al Gore, former Democratic vice president and senator, at the tribute today at Washington Hebrew congregation in Washington, D.C., to the late Senator Joe Lieberman, who was first a Democrat, then an independent, and in 2000, as Al Gore mentioned, the vice presidential running mate to his presidential bid. Some other speakers today: Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and Joe Lieberman's wife Hadassah and son Matt. You can find the full video at cspan.org. Joe Lieberman died in March at age 82. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a great night.